the station working for you, this is a WRTV special report, Faces of COVID.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Mullins. During the course of the pandemic, WRTV's news team has worked to deliver the latest data to you. But the number of cases and lives lost, they're more than just data. They represent friends, family, colleagues, and neighbors. Right now, we continue our commitment to telling their stories. It's a loss that hit the community hard. A longtime Center Grove High School teacher and coach. District leaders say Russ Milligan died at the age of 56 due to complications from COVID-19. Our Megan Sanctorum spoke with some of his former students and shares the impact he had on the community.
For 31 years, Russ Milligan was a staple of the Center Grove community. He was a chemistry teacher at the high school and a Hall of Fame softball coach on the field. But former students say he'll be remembered for much more than that.
The things that I really learned from him in high school really have shaped me into the person that I am today.
Next to my parents, he was probably one of the most influential people in my life.
You always knew, he was going to have your back.
And those are just 3 of the former students and athletes he taught, mentored, and inspired.
I was just thinking earlier how awesome it is that he has touched so many lives, not just mine and not just the girls that I know from playing softball with him, but how so many people were able to see how much of a special person he was.
This is video from a story we did on one of his players back in 2004. He led his softball teams to 5 state championships, and players say he did that by bringing out the best in every student he worked with, bringing humor while teaching skills and life lessons many still carry with them today.
Sometimes you find yourself in situations that you don't necessarily love, but you figure out ways to really get the best out of them because of the lessons that you've learned from him.
Whether that be while learning chemistry or playing a position on the team you don't necessarily love.
He made sure that I knew that my role was really important and to show up and do my best, and it would help the team.
You just feel a void for him. There's just an empty hole in your heart that once you know him, you just know is never going to be filled again.
For people who think that it might be crazy that I'm sure, that I'm grieving this much over the loss of a coach that I haven't played for since 2004, and I'm sure other people that you've talked to, if they don't understand why we're grieving so much, they never had a coach like Coach Milligan.
Megan Sanctorum, WRTV.
Many people have lost a loved one this past year. We continue to remember them for their impact. Right now, our Alyssa Donovan tells us about Lena Hefner.
She used to hold my face like this all the time. I have so many pictures where her just holding my face. I miss her smile the most.
Livia and Lena Hefner were inseparable for most of their lives.
She's more than a sister to me. She's like my everything.
The two spent time in foster homes together when they were young and have been as close as sisters could possibly be ever since.
It was me and Lena from the age of, I was 7, she was 8, until she passed away. We always lived by each other or lived together.
Lena had a lifelong struggle with asthma and started having trouble breathing last March.
She started using her inhaler frequently because she felt like her asthma was bothering her.
But then the fever started. She went to the hospital to get checked out, where she tested positive for COVID-19. Livia says her sister's health went downhill from there.
On April 3rd, the hospital called to let me know that they were putting her in an induced coma to put a breathing tube on her because she couldn't hardly breathe on her own.
Before the doctors put in the breathing tube, Lena and Livia had one last talk.
The last thing she said to me was, take care of my son. And she said, don't be scared. She said, because I believe in God. And she said, if God ready for me, she said, that's where I'm going to be.
2 weeks later, Lena Hefner died. She was 44 years old.
It's been hard on the family. It's been hard on us.
Livia is now looking after Lena's son and is honoring her sister with a new chapter of her own.
I joined school. I go to Indiana Wesleyan University online. Me and my sister never went to college, got a degree. So I'm doing this for me and her.
She plans to become a social worker to help kids in the community, a mission she knows her sister would be proud of. I'm Alyssa Donovan, WRTV.
My wife made more of an impact on society and others far more than I realized.
In 1 year, the pandemic took more than 12,000 lives in Indiana. Those aren't just numbers. They represent the people who we were loved. That includes Audrey Beckley, who was married to former WRTV anchor and reporter Ken Beckley for nearly 56 years. Ken shared his story of grief and loss and his wife's last days with our Cornelius Hawker.
Well, we had so many plans. I mean, we hoped to stay here in this house for a lot of years. We wanted to do a lot of international travel. We look forward to the day that grandchildren married. We look forward to watching our great-grandchildren grow and to be around them. So we had so many plans.
Ken Beckley's plans with his wife Audrey were cut short in August when she died because of COVID-19.
We were following every health recommendation by national public health officials. Very, very careful about washing hands and sanitizing and distancing and always wearing masks.
In the days before she tested positive for the virus, Audrey started having trouble with her legs.
I heard a thud in our bedroom, and what had happened, she had gotten out of bed, took a step, but her legs really wouldn't move, and she fell against a chest of drawers, and I found her clinging to that.
Ken tells me he struggled to get her in bed and then called 911. That was on a Monday morning. Audrey was out of the hospital that afternoon. By Tuesday night, Audrey was fine, but he started experiencing typical COVID-19 symptoms.
I started chilling, had body aches, headache, and then that went away the next afternoon.
By Thursday, Audrey was in the hospital again. And on Sunday,
her lungs they really had gotten filled with a lot of pneumonia, but they just weren't producing their own oxygen.
In her last few days, Audrey was able to join Ken and their children for a rib dinner.
We have this wonderful picture of her with her ribs and baked potato and so forth.
And made sure her son enjoyed his birthday.
As all mothers are, despite how sick they are, she said, she texted and said, "Now be sure to fix such and such for Greg for his birthday." And this was on Monday, and later that afternoon, she sent a selfie, and her trying to smile with a little oxygen tube, running the side of her face.
Audrey told her husband doctors said they were pleased with her progress. They texted again about the dinner Audrey had eaten, and that was their last conversation.
At 3 a.m., I got the call that things had just turned like that, and she was not going to make it. But a wonderful nurse held Audrey's cell phone for me 3 times that day for me to talk to Audrey and to tell her everything that you would want to tell your spouse as he or she were dying. I also told her that I would be fine and the kids would be fine, and not to just hang on out of fear that we wouldn't be.
As Ken walked us through the home he shared with Audrey, showing us all sorts of memories, telling stories about their rich life that was cut short, I asked him to address those who aren't taking COVID-19 seriously.
The maskless of America have an opportunity to really help bring down this pandemic. Those that refuse to mask and follow the other health precautions, just the 3 primary ones, are among the most selfish people ever to have lived. This is a pandemic, for God's sake.
Next, WRTV's Alyssa Donovan shares the story of Jerry Herndon, whose memory lives on through music.
Jerry Herndon loved to play bluegrass.
He played the guitar.
His daughter, Loretta Perry, never much liked the sound, but both he and her mom, they just loved it.
And they would have little get-togethers, and people would come over in the garage and play.
The melodies, something the couple shared for decades. Bernice and Jerry Herndon married young.
My mom was 17. She was still in high school.
And happily for 52 years.
Her and Dad did everything together.
Perry, one of their 3 daughters in a tight-knit and loving family.
He just always had funny, they weren't funny, actually, jokes, but he thought they were funny. And now, I just wish I could hear his jokes one more time.
The father of 3 worked for Voorhees Racing. Back in September, he took a work trip to Tennessee. When he and his wife returned home to the town of Farmland, they both had contracted COVID-19. Bernice recovered, but Jerry was hospitalized.
He was very healthy. He didn't have other health issues or anything. So that's why we were kind of shocked.
For 23 days, one family member a day could come in and see Herndon as he fought the deadly disease.
We'd wave at him through the window. He'd give us a thumbs up.
And then the 74-year-old was told he needed a ventilator.
I think he knew he wasn't going to come out of it. He had sent a couple of texts out, just telling everybody how much they loved him. And that was hard to read.
Just days later, the family said goodbye.
And even when they had taken him off life support, there was something in the back of my head, and I thought maybe he'll pull through.
But that didn't happen. Jerry Herndon passed away from COVID-19 in October, leaving behind a family still hoping for a miracle.
He left an impact on a lot of people. He really did.
Perry says her dad will live on in the music he loved so much. And in the wonderful memories she plans to continue sharing about him and their family. I'm Alyssa Donovan, WRTV.
We understand each person lost to the pandemic is more than a data point. If you've lost someone close to you, connect with us. We want to share their story so that those taken from us are never forgotten. You can reach us at facesofcovid@WRTV.com. A couple committed to getting their vaccines together, stolen of the chance. Still ahead on WRTV's Faces of COVID, the legacy of love left behind by this husband.
And buysindy.com.
Welcome back to WRTV's Faces of COVID. An Indianapolis couple was hoping to get their COVID vaccine at the same time. Unfortunately, they never got the chance to do so. Our Rafael Sanchez reports on how their families and friends are remembering their legacy of love.
Ernest and Ann Wilkins loved each other, and that connection was felt by family and friends.
I'm very heartbroken. Because I loved Ann and Ronald, just like my brother and sister. And I want people to take this serious.
Ernest battled diabetes and cancer. The couple was diagnosed with COVID-19 in December. They were admitted to St. Vincent Hospital and placed on ventilators. They never left the hospital. Ernest died on Friday, Ann on Saturday. Too much for one family, too much for a long list of friends.
She was deeply committed to her profession and to her fellow educators.
The IPS superintendent took this picture with Ann after learning they shared a birthday in May. Ann was a teacher with IPS for 13 years and then became a union leader, always promoting public school education.
I think what she did well was sort of holding everybody to account, because at the end of the day, her goal was to make sure kids were getting served well.
As a kid, Ernest loved playing the trumpet. He graduated from Shortridge High School, Ball State, and retired from Allstate. He loved sports and knew his stats. And every day, he was on the phone with the man that he knew as a child at School 43.
And that's what we thought of each other, is that we were brothers, and we did everything together. We talked 10 times a day. If I woke up first in the morning, I would call him. If he woke up first in the morning, he'd call me. And on during the day, we would talk, 10 times a day.
The couple had many plans for this new year, including getting the COVID vaccine. The cruelty of the moment stings, but the promise of their heavenly rise brings comfort to those who are heartbroken.
Because I would rather you have a reaction to the vaccine than to try to fight COVID, the disease, because a lot of times you won't win. And it's real. I've seen it for myself, and it's something that I don't want to see again.
Working for you, Rafael Sanchez, WRTV.
Chuck Fisher is another one of our faces of COVID.
February 10th was our first date, and from that date going on, I don't think we ever spent a day apart. We both kind of knew we found the one.
That was over 3 decades ago. After a short engagement, Lori and Chuck Fisher got married and went on to have 2 kids. Lori says Chuck always put family first, coaching teams and going on trips. She says her husband was healthy and active before contracting COVID-19 in October.
He had a physical job. He worked out in the yard. He played sports. I mean, everybody that you talk to when they hear his story basically say he would have been the last person I would have ever thought this would happen to. He had so much more life to live, and he had so many more things to accomplish. COVID only defines the last 4 weeks of his life. He was so much more than that.
After a long battle in the hospital, Chuck Fisher died on December 8th, just 1 week shy of his 61st birthday. We are sharing the stories of Hoosiers who have lost loved ones. And now WRTV's Cornelius Hawker shares the story of a healthcare worker whose dedication and love to her family is something they say knew no bounds. They miss her and her love every day.
Why do you have to comb your hair?
Whether it was little moments like this with her grandson or big moments like this. Holding the camera at her daughter's gender reveal party, Kendra Irons' family was the most important thing in her life.
If you knew her, you knew she was either talking about work or at work, or she was bragging about her girls. And like my sisters play volleyball, so she was always talking about volleyball this and volleyball that, or the grandkids this.
Angel Spencer is Kendra's oldest. Born when her mom was 16, the two, in a way, grew up together. Not only was she able to see her mom find a loving husband and having her 2 younger sisters, but she also got to see her mom progress in the career she loved, nursing.
She did burn, ER. Eventually, she ended up making it to house supervisor, which is like she coordinated all of the nursing, everything for the hospital.
Kindra eventually became a nurse practitioner and started working for home health, doing in-home visits. Unfortunately, that's where her family thinks she contracted the virus, despite taking all the recommended precautions in public and at work.
At work, she wore like the face shield and the whole like hazmat suit basically type of thing. So it's like, of all people that would have gotten it, it's like, you got it?
And whenever you hear people say, it's only like less than 1% of people dying from it, how does that make you feel?
It infuriates me. I actually work at a restaurant, and even just when people refuse to wear masks, like, we're gonna take it off in 5 seconds. Like, yeah, but that 5 seconds that you're walking through the restaurant could potentially save someone's life. Like, my mom was young. There was no good reason for her to pass away.
Now, at 25, Angel is helping take care of her younger sisters, splitting their time between their dads and her house. All of them trying to figure out this thing called life without their mom, taken from them because of COVID-19.
I think mainly that's just my kind of life goal, is just keep sharing her story. Like, everything that she was, I want to try to like push out to the world.
Working for you, Cornelius Hawker, WRTV.
Next, a man said to be so selfless he'd share his last dinner on earth with you if you were hungry.
He married my mom in 1981 and took on her and 6 kids. And he was already raising 3 of his own because their mother had passed.
Kimberly Roach was 6 years old when her mom met Manson McKenney. Together, the couple raised 14 children. Although technically her stepfather, Roach says McKenney was her dad. After fighting in the Vietnam War and earning a Purple Heart, McKenney worked at the General Motors plant by the White River for 45 years. He spent his retirement years watching his 41 grandchildren and 37 great-grandchildren grow up. And when asked to remember her father's legacy, Roach repeatedly used the word selfless.
If he had his last meal, he would give it to someone. He wouldn't share it. He would say, here, he was that person. He was a very, very good man. I mean, he was just on his deathbed. All he worried about was my mother, taking care of my mom, because he never thought of himself. He thought of all of us.
Roach says her dad caught COVID in December after being put on a ventilator in the hospital. He briefly got better, giving the family time to say goodbye before dying on February 2nd. Manson McKenney was 76 years old. Among the more than 12,000 Hoosiers who have lost their lives to the virus is Sylvia Gray. Our Alyssa Donovan shares her story.
She loved life and just loved family.
Sylvia Gray was all about the 3 F's: faith, family, and friends. Her daughter Kathy Gray says her mom had a heart of gold.
If you asked her to do something, even if it meant she was going to have to bust her tail or anything, it was going to get done.
Married to the love of her life, Earl, for 65 years.
They were high school sweethearts.
Gray was diagnosed with lung cancer almost 3 years ago. She was doing well and the cancer was at bay, but she was very high risk if she caught COVID-19. In December, the 84-year-old wasn't feeling well, so family brought her to the hospital.
Her oxygen level was down to 83. I mean, we still had no idea it was COVID.
Both she and Earl tested positive for the virus. She was admitted and Earl was sent home. He returned a few days later and was admitted to another floor. After several days, Kathy received a phone call.
I was going to be allowed to be in there with Mom. And I said, there's one wish I have, and that is for my dad to be there.
When Kathy arrived, her mom was excited to see her. And then the nurse said there was another surprise.
And they brought Dad in. I can remember both nurses, Dad's nurse and Mom's nurse, looking at each other because Dad had gloves on because he was fully gowned and everything, just as I was. And they both said, I don't care if you don't care. And they took his gloves off so Mom and Dad could hold hand to hand.
That's when Kathy told her parents why they were allowed to be together that day.
Told them that we were there together because this was Mom's last day. She looked up, but so excited, she said, hallelujah, I'm going to heaven. Because she knew she was not getting better.
A moment so many others were robbed of during the pandemic. Earl held the hand of his love, Sylvia, as she passed away on December 29th, leaving behind a legacy of faithfulness and commitment to family. I'm Alyssa Donovan, WRTV.
If you have lost a loved one to COVID-19 and would like to share their life and legacy with the community, contact us at facesofcovid@WRTV.com. COVID-19 doesn't discriminate on who it takes as victims. Still ahead here, the life of a strong and feisty matriarch as we continue to show you the faces of COVID on WRTV.
Infokit.com.
This is WRTV's Faces of COVID. While vaccines are saving lives, Hoosiers are still dying from COVID-19 every day. We're making sure those lives are not forgotten.
She was real strong, feisty too. She'd tell you what was on her mind.
Ellen Gardner says her mother, Bertha Manley, was a loving but tough matriarch of a big family. She raised 6 kids on her own after her husband died. Doctors diagnosed Bertha with dementia a few years ago. She eventually moved to a long-term care facility where she contracted COVID-19. Bertha Manley died April 30th, 2020 at the age of 85. Ellen says until her mother's final days and despite her dementia diagnosis, she always remembered her family.
She loved everybody, and every time they would come and see her, she smiled. She remembered, that's one thing she didn't lose. She didn't forget nobody that came to see her, her grandkids, great-grandkids and stuff.
Much love in that family. The stories we've shared are some of the thousands of lives lost to COVID-19 in Indiana alone. You can find more stories anytime at WRTV.com/facesofcovid.